It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Financial Services Council and to all the delegates for coming along. In David's absence, I'll try and channel his energy and his passion by addressing some of the problems New Zealand's facing with regulation and what this government's doing about it. And I'll also touch on some of the issues that I'm working on in my role as Parliamentary Undersecretary for Resource Management Reform and how some of the work we're doing to panel beat the RMA and eventually replace it is also going to help unlock productivity and growth. Just to start with, a bit of a statistic. In 2015, the NZ Institute for Economic Research study estimated the cost to businesses to comply with tax and regulation was around $5 billion per annum, around 1.3% of GDP, with tax regulation being less than half of that amount. The quality of regulation in New Zealand has been in freefall. According to the OECD rankings, in 1998, New Zealand was second in terms of regulatory quality. This year, we are 20th. It's no coincidence that New Zealand did experience very strong productivity growth in the 1990s and the early part of the 21st century, but we have fallen behind since dramatically. The OECD Product Market Regulation Indicators, released in July of this year, assess the alignment of a country's regulatory framework with internationally accepted best practices. New Zealand businesses, it turns out, and many of you will know, face bureaucratic hurdles, barriers to foreign direct investment, and cumbersome steps to acquire licences and permits. Kiwis have their productivity sapped because of the time spent complying with edicts from Wellington. Not only does poor regulation add to the cost of things we do, it will simply stop some people and businesses doing things that we need them to do. The cumulative effect of all of this is we've become a country of can't rather than the country we used to be, can do. In recent years, I've seen more businesses reporting that government regulation is a barrier to investment and a barrier to growth and hiring people. Regulatory barriers in the energy sector are also highlighted in the OECD report, and I'm sure you've heard horror stories about factories closing due to energy prices and energy shortages. Poor regulation suppresses highly skilled jobs, and it crimps New Zealand's ability to grow our wealth as a nation. That's why the coalition government, and in terms of the ACT National Coalition Agreement, has set up the Ministry for Regulation with three key tasks. One, to cut existing red tape, and that starts with sector reviews. Two, to improve the scrutiny of new laws that we will make. And three, to improve the capability of the regulatory workforce. David Seymour has wasted no time in releasing the pressure valve on New Zealand's productivity. In his role, he's moved quickly to identify these areas that need urgent attention and which are held most tightly in the vice-like grip of burdensome regulation. Minister Seymour's mapped out a plan to relieve them, starting with the review into early childhood education. The first cab off the rank has received a strong response in consultation. Over 2,300 people engaged with the consultation process. We had submissions from parents, ECE centre owners, teachers, child advocacy groups, unions of course, research bodies and other interested groups. The sector review was initiated following concern from parents about there being a lack of affordable options and from the ECE sector itself highlighting the impact regulations were having on their ability to deliver for communities. People who work in the sector confirmed they would like to spend less time on compliance-based paperwork that does not actually benefit children's learning and well-being. Service providers raised issues with regulatory framework and its implementation and how it affects their ability to offer the services at the prices that they would like to people who need someone to look after their children. They've said that requirements are being inconsistently applied and there's been a confusion between what is a requirement versus what is guidance. The next step will see the Minister analyse the feedback and provide a report back to Cabinet. Decisions will be sought, and the aim is to have this review and any recommendations wrapped up by the end of the year. Now, the themes arising from this review into the ECE, when I was reading that in preparation to come and speak to you today, seem to be very similar to the themes in an area which I'm strongly focused on, and that is reform of the resource management system. It's a system so broad, so complex, so allergic to growth that we cannot allow it to stand. We cannot go on thinking that every activity needs a consent and that every consent requires reinventing the wheel. That's in terms of what conditions to apply, when most things have been done before, like building a road or building a new subdivision. Despite its original intent, the application of the Resource Management Act has increasingly treated land use as a privilege rather than a right. The time and cost to get resource consents for major projects have increased dramatically over the last decade, directly contributing to the housing crisis. Infrastructure consents cost $1.3 billion per year, contributing to the infrastructure deficit. That's just stacking up all the technical reports to get the consent that's not actually $1.3 billion spent on compliance or building anything. The costs and delays caused by the RMA threaten this coalition government's commitment to deliver renewable energy and emissions reduction objectives and to meet our housing growth targets. Now, full replacement of a system of the RMAs with a system based on property rights is in the ACT National Coalition Agreement. And that's ultimately the only way we're going to unlock this regulatory red and green tape that the Resource Management Act has imposed on us. While this must address material spillover or external effects on people's property rights, including the rights of the environment, we do need a fundamental shift away from this broad scope where people can object to things that don't actually affect them, even though they might feel that they do. This is the challenge ahead of us with replacing the Resource Management Act, which I look forward to sharing with you more soon. However, in the meantime, we've already made some changes to the Resource Management Act and the system that we're stuck with for now. We've repealed the Natural and Built Environments Act and the Spatial Planning Act, which would have taken over a decade and billions to implement if we had followed Labor's prescription for planning reform. What we've also done is we've introduced a fast-track consenting regime, which should be passed by the end of this year and provide for a whole lot of projects of regional and national significance to have a much more streamlined consenting pathway. We've introduced an RMA bill, essentially to panel beat the heck out of what we can and deal with some of those immediate and really egregious things that are stopping farmers from farming, preventing quarries from expanding or opening when we need rock to build infrastructure and houses and roads. We're also progressing another amendment bill to get some other quick and important wins over the line this year, alongside a program to align what we call secondary legislation or regulation, national direction instruments. Anyone who's been involved in planning or trying to get consent or has been waiting for the subdivision that their new house is going to be built in to be finished would know that national policy statements and national environmental standards is over 29 instruments in the RMA, regulatory instruments or secondary legislation, which are incoherent, confused, often pulling in quite different conflicting directions. If you think you've got problems in the financial sector, try planning, try getting your business to build a subdivision and getting consents to do it, or wanting to build something like, if you're a council, like a wastewater treatment plant, and having to work your way through this massive regulatory conflict. Now, in order to sort this out, we're going to deliver an infrastructure national direction that cuts through and sets clear direction for why infrastructure is important. Well, of course it's important because it delivers human well-being. The lights wouldn't be on, the aircon wouldn't be on, your phones wouldn't be working without infrastructure. A national policy statement for infrastructure is a critical step in streamlining the consenting pathway. It'll provide consistent direction for how plans and decisions are made when it comes to infrastructure in both the natural environment, where people do have legitimate concerns, and the urban environment. It's going to provide clear direction to decision makers to recognise the benefits of infrastructure. It'll drive consistency, certainty, and confidence for investment. That's my current significant undertaking. As a civil engineer, previously for a short time as an environmental scientist till I got the engineering bug, this is one of the things I've come to government to do. This national direction will cover network infrastructure like transport and water, site-specific infrastructure like ports, hospitals and waste facilities. It'll talk to the other national policy statements like renewable electricity generation and transmission and distribution. So we actually get alignment in some of the regulatory instruments, so they're not using different language and talking about different concepts. It'll also pave the way for a rolling mall of new infrastructure national standards, not guidelines, but actual standards, to codify all of the established and well-accepted practices about how we manage environmental effects when we build things like roads, when we upgrade drainage, and when we do housing subdivisions. We're going to end the insanity of this pointless bespokeism that locks people and businesses up in unnecessary planning and consenting processes. So in summary, what this highlights is New Zealand does need a red tape reset, and we are getting on with the business of delivering that reset. The Minister for Regulation has a number of sector reviews underway, not just the ECE, but also into agricultural products and agricultural health remedies, which are also suffering from undue regulation. We simply can't get the modern, safe agricultural and veterinary remedies that we need for our animals and our farms, so that we might even comply with future standards from the markets that we hope to export to. He's also going to be looking into the finance sector and all of the regulatory issues that burden this sector. And, of course, the ACT National Coalition Agreement includes that we will review and rewrite the CCFA, which is underway, and that we will also review and update the Overseas Investment Act to reduce the tests that are required for inbound investment into New Zealand. The outcome of tackling these issues will mean that New Zealanders spend less time complying with those edicts from Wellington, will have more affordable living costs and more interesting and productive jobs. The Ministry for Regulation will undertake a critical role working with regulators across government. That's to improve the quality of what they do and how they do it. And in turn, this will improve the experience and the lives of all New Zealanders who rely on their government to be productive and focused on wealth generation. The Ministry for Regulation will provide a key check to prevent red tape behemoths like the RMA from coming into being in the future. The culture of lawmaking needs real change, so Kiwis spend less time complying and more time doing. The end result will be higher wages and lower living costs. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.